The desert sky looked like a hot metal sheet. Heat waves rose from the sand and bent the air. The twin suns stood high, small and white, like two sharp eyes. Elias Grant moved one slow step at a time, boots sinking into the soft surface. His water gauge blinked a warning. His oxygen readout was fine, but his canteen felt light. He kept walking. He had mapped this region for 3 days. He had seen broken bones of long-dead creatures. He had seen glass dunes where lightning had melted sand. He had seen no people. The map called this place the Dead Dunes. The Zathari called it worse names. Names like Mouth of the Worm. Names like Sand That Eats. He stopped at the crest of a ridge to catch his breath. The wind climbed the slope and hissed across the top. It carried a faint sound with it, like a bird crying. He lifted his head and listened. The sound came again. It was not a bird. It was a voice. Fear lived inside that voice. It cut through the wind and stabbed at him. Elias looked over the ridge. The dune dropped into a shallow bowl below. In the middle, the sand moved. It moved like thick water. Something dark thrashed inside it. A slim arm slapped against the surface. A hand reached out, fingers spread wide. Elias saw a face then. Bright eyes. Violet skin. The marks of the Zathari across the cheeks. It was a young woman sinking fast. Elias did not think. He slid down the slope. Sand poured into his boots. The ground shook under him in little waves. He could feel the quicksand pulling at the edges of the bowl. He stopped 2 long steps from the moving patch. "Stay still!" he shouted. "Do not fight it." The girl's mouth opened in a gasp. Sand filled her throat. She coughed and tried to speak, but the quicksand took her breath again. Elias dropped his pack and yanked out a coil of rope. His hands worked fast. He tied a loop and set a knot he could pull tight. He checked the anchor. There was nothing to tie to. Only sand, more sand, and the sun. He clawed into the slope with his shovel and drove in his collapsible mast. He wrapped the rope around the mast twice, braced his boots, and threw the loop. The first throw fell short. The rope sank a little and floated again. The girl reached, but her arm sank another hand's length. Elias rethrew. The loop dropped over her shoulder and slipped under her arms. The rope bit like a seatbelt. Elias took a breath, leaned back, and pulled. It did not work at first. The quicksand was greedy and strong. It held her like a giant hand. Elias pulled harder. His shoulder burned. He dug his heels into the slope. Sand slid under his boots, but the mast held. The rope stretched and groaned. "Breathe slow," he said, panting. "Do not struggle. Let me do the pull." Her eyes locked on his face. They were wide and full of heat and water. She nodded once, very small. Elias counted in his head. 1, 2, 3. He pulled with all his weight. The girl rose half a hand. The sand growled. He pulled again. She rose another hand. The quicksand spat bubbles. It looked like it was angry now. A shadow fell across the bowl. Elias looked up. A thin cloud crossed one sun, and for a heartbeat the world looked cooler. He pulled again, timing the effort with his breath. His back screamed. His mouth tasted like coin metal. The girl came up to her ribs, then to her waist. She hooked her elbows over the rope and fought to keep them there. "Good," Elias said softly. "Good. Keep your elbows locked." He dug his heels deeper and leaned back until he thought the rope would cut him in two. The mast shifted. The sand hissed. He pulled anyway. The girl slid forward, slow as a crawling child. The quicksand let go with a wet sigh, and she lay across the surface, half in, half out, chest heaving. "Don't stand," he said. "Roll toward me," she rolled. The rope dug under her arms and left dark red marks on her violet skin. She rolled again. He pulled steady and sure, giving her a little slack and then taking it back. Inch by inch, she reached the firm lip of the bowl. Elias grabbed her wrists and hauled her clear. They tumbled together into the hard sand and lay there, side by side, gulping air. The wind picked up. Sand skittered over their clothes and hair like tiny insects. Elias sat up first. He unhooked the loop and checked her face. She was young. Maybe 19 human years, maybe a little more. She wore light desert armor that looked like bone and woven reed. Her hair was silver and braided close to the head, with small shells tied into the ends. Her eyes were striking. A bright amethyst with a ring of amber near the pupil. She stared at him with shock and relief. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She blinked and swallowed. Her voice came out soft and rough from the sand. "My shoulder, it burns. But I am alive, human." The last word carried a strange weight. Not cruel, but not friendly either. Careful. Old. He pulled a small vial from his kit and poured a clear liquid on the rope burns. The liquid foamed and cooled the skin. She hissed through her teeth and then relaxed. "This will stop infection," he said. "I am Elias, as she tried shaping the human name. Then she tapped her chest lightly. Lyra of the Zathari, daughter of Varnai." She hesitated. "Chief Varnai." Elias paused. He had heard that name on crackly radio warnings. He had seen it stamped on military briefs. The Zathari chief kept humans away from his borders. He was wise, some said. He was ruthless, others said. Elias looked at the girl's face again and saw the small gold rings in her ear ridge. He saw the cut of her armor. He believed her. He stood and offered her his hand. She took it and he pulled her gently to her feet. Her legs shook. He put his canteen in her hand. "Sip," he said. "Not too much." She sipped and he watched her throat move. He was alert now, watching the horizon too. If she was here, others might be near. Guards, hunters. He did not know if they would call him hero or thief. He did not know if they would shoot him on sight. The wind swung around and brought the smell of hot resin. It also brought a new sound. A soft chitter like bone beads hitting one another. Lyra heard it too. Her eyes snapped to the ridge behind Elias. "Run," she said, urgent now. "Not away." Up the side. The sand stirs again. The pit is hungry. "It will take another if we do not move." Elias grabbed the mast and yanked it free. He coiled the rope fast and threw the pack over one shoulder. He put his free hand against Lyra's back, steady but not pushing, and guided her up the slope. The ground trembled. A thin stream of sand ran toward the center, like water to a drain. Something deep below was shifting its weight. Elias felt his stomach flip. He and Lyra climbed as the bowl behind them sighed and then collapsed. For a second it looked like a mouth closing. They reached the ridge and fell to their knees. From here Elias could see further. Blue hills in the far distance. The dull glint of his old campsite 2 dunes away, and to the left a faint smudge in the air, as if heat itself wore a cloak. The smudge moved. It was a patrol. 3 figures lean and quick, with polearms slung across their backs and face veils wrapped tight. Zathari scouts. Lyra saw them and stood at once, though her legs still trembled. She lifted both arms high and crossed her forearms, the signal for safety among her people. The scouts changed their path and sprinted toward them. Elias rose slowly and kept his hands visible. He did not reach for his sidearm. He did not reach for anything. The first scout arrived and dropped to one knee before Lyra. He spoke fast in a language Elias knew only in fragments. Lyra answered with calm words, then turned and pointed at Elias. The scout's eyes flicked to the human. They were the same bright amethyst as Lyra's, but without the amber ring. The scout looked to Lyra again, shocked. She nodded once, firm. The scout stood, pressed his palm to his chest, and faced Elias. "In our speech," Lyra said, her voice steadier now. "He says thank you. He says you pulled me from the hungry sand. He says I would not be here without you." Elias nodded. "I am glad you are alive." The second scout arrived and pointed at the horizon. Elias followed the line of his finger. A red dust plume rose there, thin but tall. It was the shape of speed. The scouts grew tense. Lyra's jaw tightened. "Hunters," she said. "Not ours. Worm chasers and bone thieves. They saw my fall. They followed the drums." Her eyes went to the mast in Elias's hand and then to the rope.
"They will want your tools."
"They will want my father's grief." Elias understood. The dead dunes hid more than pits. They hid people who took what was not theirs. He looked at Lyra's bare feet and at the blood where the rope had cut. He looked at his map tablet. There was a narrow gully less than a dune away, and beyond it a line of rock spines. If they reached the spines, they could take cover and break sight lines. If they stayed here, the riders would see them from far off. "Can you run?" he asked. Lyra's face was pale purple now, but her eyes were steady. "I can run." Elias glanced at the scouts. "With me," he said and pointed. The scouts hesitated, then looked at Lyra. She nodded. That was enough. They moved down the ridge in a tight group, careful to avoid soft patches. Elias set the pace, fast but not wild, a rhythm that saved breath. The rope coiled across his chest. The mast knocked against his shoulder. The wind picked up grains of sand and threw them behind like a tail. The plume grew in the corner of his vision. The riders were closing. They reached the gully just as the first whistle cut the air. It sounded like a hawk's cry, but higher and thinner. The scouts snapped their heads up and cursed in their tongue. They pushed Lyra and Elias down the gully wall. Sand slid under their feet. At the bottom it was cool and shadowed and tight. Elias could smell wet mineral. He could also hear a strange sound like a drum beating very slowly. It came from under the ground. The scouts heard it too and tensed. Lyra put a hand on Elias's arm. "Do not stomp," she whispered. "Move soft." They crept along the gully. Above them the suns poured white light across the ridge, and shadows like knife blades cut the slope. A rider's silhouette flashed on the lip. Long spear, long cloak, bone mask with a hooked beak. The rider paused, listening. Elias held his breath. A drop of sweat slid down his temple. It tickled. He ignored it. The rider moved on. The rock spines rose ahead like black teeth. They were broken pieces of an ancient ridge, each as tall as a tree, each with narrow slots between. Elias led them into the largest slot and pushed them deep into the cool, dark space. He turned and watched the gully mouth. The riders arrived a moment later, 5 of them. They fanned out in a slow half-circle and studied the sand. Their mounts were light and odd, like deer with too long legs and too many joints. The riders' masks made them look like birds carved from bone and grief. One dismounted and knelt. He touched the sand with 2 fingers. He lifted them to his nose. He pointed at the gully. He had found the scent. The scouts lifted their weapons. One pressed a knife into Elias's hand, a simple thing with a bone handle. Elias took it and felt its balance. The drumbeat under the ground grew a little louder. Lyra's fingers tightened on his sleeve. "If they call the sand," she breathed, "we must move. But if we move, they will see." The rider in front lifted his spear and tapped it twice on the ground. The sand answered with a tiny ripple. He tapped again, harder. The ripple grew. Elias thought fast. He remembered a training brief on the Zathari, how they loved rhythm, how they used it to speak to the dunes, how certain beats could wake a shallow pit. He also remembered something about counter-rhythms, a way to confuse the sand. He slipped his mast free and set its base on the stone floor. He wrapped the rope around the top once. "Trust me," he whispered. He leaned the mast on the rock and flicked the rope. It snapped against the stone with a small, sharp sound. He did it again and again, building a steady beat that did not match the rider's tapping. The 2 patterns crossed. The sand rippled in both directions like a pool hit by 2 stones. The rider frowned and squinted at the ground. He tapped again, faster now. Elias changed his rope beat, still steady, still wrong. The sand tried to listen to both. It lost the shape of the pit and flattened a little. The front rider hissed and turned his mask toward the rocks. He had not found them, but he felt something was wrong. He lifted his spear and signaled the others to spread. The scout stiffened. Lyra lifted her chin. Elias stopped the rope beat and held the mast with both hands like a staff. A new sound came from the far side of the gully. Hooves? No, lighter, many feet. A ripple of bodies moving at once. The riders turned their heads, uncertain. Then a ribbon of small sand lizards poured over the ridge, hundreds of them. Little arrow shapes, tails raised. They ran across the gully floor like silver rain. The ground became a living thing. The rider's mount spooked, dancing sideways. One rider swore and smacked his mount's neck. Another tried to hold formation and failed. Lyra's eyes widened. She looked at Elias with surprise and something like respect. "You woke the runners," she whispered. "You twisted the beat." "Lucky guess," Elias said, though he knew it was not luck. It was pattern. It was listening. In the confusion, he signaled with 2 fingers. The small group slipped backward through the rock slot and into the deeper shade. They moved soft, soft like smoke. The drum under the ground faded. The lizards passed. The riders struggled to settle their mounts and rebuild their rhythm with the sand. By the time they had control again, the rock spines hid Elias and the Zathari from sight. They did not stop until they reached a narrow cave, a cool wound in the stone. Inside, thin roots hung from the ceiling like hair. A trickle of water ran down one wall and made a tiny pool at the floor's edge. Elias let Lyra sit first. He filled a cup for her and watched color return to her cheeks. The scout stood at the entrance listening. Lyra looked at Elias over the rim of the cup. Her voice was very quiet now. "You saved my life," she said. "And then you saved it again." Elias shrugged one shoulder. His back still ached from the rope. Anyone would have helped. "No," Lyra said. "Not anyone." She searched his face for a long breath as if weighing something heavy. Then she set the cup down. My father will wish to see you. Elias felt the shape of the world change in that moment. He did not know if it changed for better or worse. He only knew the path he had started on was no longer his alone. Outside the cave, the dunes shifted. The riders' whistles faded into distance. The suns inched across the sky. From deeper in the cave came a soft echo like the ghost of a drum. The scout's eyes flicked to it and then to each other. Lyra's mouth tightened, but she did not look afraid now. She looked like someone who had made a choice. She lifted her chin. "Rest while you can, Elias," she said. "When night comes, we move. And when dawn comes, the clan will come too." He nodded, but sleep did not come. He sat with his back to the cool rock and watched the light shift at the cave mouth. He felt the rope burns on his hands and the steady throb in his shoulders. He listened to the tiny water. He listened to the silence behind it. He knew this. The desert had tried to take 2 lives today. It had failed. But it would try again. Far away on a ridge that looked toward the heart of the dunes, a line of drums began to beat. Slow, deep, and full of promise. The sound rode the wind like a vow. And somewhere under that sound, just low enough to be missed by anyone not listening, came the whisper of many feet marching. Night came with a thin silver line along the dunes. The heat faded and the air turned sharp and cool. The cave smelled like wet stone and old dust. Elias did not sleep. He sat with his back against the rock and listened to the tiny water drip in the dark. The scouts took turns at the entrance, watching the gully. Lyra lay near the wall with a blanket of woven reed over her shoulders. Her breath was slow and even, but her eyes were open. When she turned her head, the silver of her hair caught the faint light. "We move when the first moon lifts," one scout whispered. His name was Carr. He had a long scar across his chin and a careful voice. "The dunes will be quiet. The hunters will think we ran for the flat sea of sand. We will take the rock path instead." Lyra nodded. "We go to the bone rings," she said. "There is a drum station there. From there I can call my father." Elias looked at the rope burns on his hands. He could still feel the quicksand pulling at his shoulders. "Will your father send help?" he asked. Lyra's eyes held steady on his face. "He will come himself." They left the cave when the first moon rose, soft and white. The second moon still slept below the horizon. Under the pale glow, the rock spines looked like old teeth broken from a giant mouth. The group moved single file, feet careful on stone, not sand. The scouts checked each step in the corners ahead. Elias copied their quiet rhythm as best he could. He kept his mast tied to his pack and his rope coiled across his chest. His breath smoked in the cool air. The bone rings were older than the dunes. They were circles of tall stones with holes drilled through them, like giant flutes set in the ground. The Zathari said the wind made voices when it passed through. Tonight there was no wind. In the center of the ring stood a drum plate, flat rock with a pattern of small cups carved into it. Lyra knelt beside it, placed her palms near the cups, and closed her eyes. She did not strike the stone with sticks. She used her hands and fingers, tapping and pressing in a pattern so soft Elias could barely hear. The sound ran through the plate and into the ground like water through a pipe. It did not echo in the air. It slipped away below where other things listened. Carr stood beside Elias and watched the horizon. "These stones remember," he said, almost to himself. "They remember the old path. How far?" Elias asked. Carr lifted his chin toward the east, far as the Salt Ridge, far as the Red Canyon, far as my chief's ears. Lyra's eyes opened. "He heard me," she said. The relief in her voice was small but real. "He is coming. How many?" Carr asked. Lyra listened with her hands still on the plate as if the stone gave tiny answers back. A faint smile touched her mouth. "All who march tonight." They moved again, leaving the bone rings for a winding cut through the rocks. The path opened to a high ridge. From there the dunes lay like waves under the moon. Far to the east a dark line broke the smooth desert. It moved like a shadow with purpose. Elias narrowed his eyes. The line grew and separated into shapes. Dozens at first, then hundreds, cloaks, banners, spears, a long river of warriors flowing over the sand. At the front rode a figure in tall armor with a bone crown across his brow. Lyra's breath caught. "My father," she whispered. Carr pressed his palm to his chest. The other scouts did the same. Elias stood still and watched the river grow until it filled the lower dunes. The march was silent, no chants, no metal. Only the soft hush of many feet and the slow breath of the desert. When the front rank reached the base of the ridge, the crowned rider lifted a hand. The river stopped. Dust drifted like a veil and settled. The rider climbed the ridge with 6 guards. Up close, his armor looked like carved shell layered over thick leather. Marks of age crossed his face ridge. His eyes were amethyst like Lyra's, but darker, deeper, like wells. When he reached the top, he stepped down from his mount and stood before Lyra. He did not speak at first. He studied the rope burns on her skin, the dust in her hair, the tired lines at the corners of her eyes. Then he took her by the shoulders and bowed his head to hers. They stood like that for one long breath. When he lifted his head, he looked to Elias. "You are the human," he said in plain, careful trade speech. "I am," Elias said. "Elias Grant." The chief's gaze weighed him, not cruel, not kind, but exact. "You pulled my daughter from the hungry sand," he said. "You risked your life when the dunes tried to take hers. By the law of the sands, this debt is ours to carry." Elias shifted his feet. He felt the river of warriors at his back, quiet and watching. He felt the thin night air on his face. "I would help her again," he said. "No debt asked." A sound like a cut laugh came from one of the guards, quick and bitter. The chief did not turn his head, but the laughing guard dropped his eyes to the ground. Lyra spoke sharp in her own language. The guard stepped back a half step. Chief Varnai lifted a hand. "The law is older than you, human. Older than me. It binds us, not you." He turned and faced the river of his people. His voice rolled out over them, low and strong. "This human saved my blood. He stands under the shadow of my banner. Any hand raised against him is raised against me." The river answered, not with a cheer, but with a low, steady note. A hum passed from throat to throat, a sound like a promise. Elias felt the hair rise on his arms. Lyra exhaled slowly, as if she had been holding this breath since the moment she fell into the sand. But not every face in the front ranks held peace. Elias noticed some eyes lingered on him with a cold light. He noticed hands tighten on spear shafts. The chief's words had weight, yes. They also cast a long shadow. They marched at dawn. The second moon slid under the horizon and the suns rose one by one. The Zathari moved like a single body, smooth and sure. Elias walked near the front with Lyra and the chief. He tasted dust and felt the tired heaviness of long hours without sleep. Still he kept pace. Around mid-morning they passed old markers, broken stone towers and dry wells. At the edge of the dunes, a jagged ridge lifted like a wall. Beyond it lay foothills, and far to the north the faint line of human structures. Satellite domes and scanner spires. The outpost where Elias had filed his maps and recharged his water. He felt a small knot pulled tight in his chest. Humans would see this march. Humans would fear it. "Your people will be afraid," Lyra said quietly, reading his face. "They know your clan as a story that ends in blood," Elias said. He kept his voice level and simple. "They will think you come to fight." "We come to bow," the chief said, not looking at him. But fear does not listen to quiet words. By noon they reached a flat of hardpan that ran like a street toward the outpost. The dome shone pale in the glare. An alarm siren cut the air thin and sharp. Tiny human figures moved on the walls. A crawler rolled to the front gate and stopped, cannon raised. Elias could feel the tension in the Zathari ranks by the way the hum died, and footfalls grew slower. Carr shifted his spear and said something under his breath. The chief stopped the march with a hand and walked forward alone. Lyra and Elias followed 5 steps behind. At 50 paces from the gate, the chief lifted both hands, palms out empty. His cloak fell straight and still. The guards on the wall shouted. A human officer climbed the ladder and stepped to the ridge. Elias knew his face. Commander Hale, a hard man with a scar over one eye and a habit of speaking in orders even when calm. "Elias!" Hale called, surprise and anger fighting in his voice. "What in the hells are you doing, son? Saving your day from a flame you do not see yet," Elias called back. He kept his tone clear. "Stand down the cannon." "Hear him first." Hale stared. The cannon did not lower. The chief waited like a carved tree. "I am Varnai," he said finally in heavy human speech. "Chief of the Zathari, your man pulled my daughter from death. We walked to carry a debt. We walked to put our spears between him and any harm." Silence lived for a second. The sun beat on metal. The wind did not help. Hale looked from the chief to the river of Zathari, still as stone behind him, then back to Elias. His jaw worked. "You expect me to believe that's a guard of honor, not an army?" He said. "Both," Elias said. "You can choose which one you get by what you do next." A long breath stretched thin as wire. Then the cannon's nose dipped a fraction. Hale lifted a hand and signaled small. The gate did not open, but the rifles on the wall lowered to waist height. He did not smile. He did not trust. But he did not shoot. "We will speak," he said. "5 only. No more." The chief nodded once. He pointed to Lyra, to Elias, to Carr, and to one old woman with pale tattoos on her hands. The 4 Zathari walked with Elias to the gate. The rest of the clan waited in a quiet line under the suns. Inside the outpost, the air tasted like recycled metal and old coffee. The meeting room was small, with a single table, 2 fans that squeaked, and a map pinned to the wall with dull knives. Hale stood at the head of the table. His eyes never left the chief's face. A medic offered Lyra a seat and a drink. She accepted the seat, not the drink. Elias took a place near the map where he could watch both the door and the table,